What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you another Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. Folks, in today's video we'll be looking at a few graded card sales from the newest set, Phantasmal Flames, that was just officially released yesterday. However, all throughout this past week we have been seeing graded copies of these cards come through an auction, and we'll also be taking a look at some record-breaking vintage card sales as well. As usual, a lot to go over in today's video, so please stick around till the very end. A quick shout out to today's auction recap sponsor. It's the one and only lowpopping.com, your source for high-end investment-worthy Pokemon cards. If you are a collector, especially of vintage Pokemon card grails, you have to go check out lowpopping.com, where they currently have tons of graded Pokemon cards and graded booster packs available, including PSA graded, Beckett graded, and CGC graded cards, as well as numerous autographed cards and sealed product. And as I say week after week, folks, if you don't have the cash on hand, you can easily trade for the card or cards that you must have for your collection. And you can still make offers on cards above $500, and don't forget they have buy now, pay later options for you to take advantage of as well. Lowpopping.com, a tried and true source for high-end investments. I will put the link to the website in the description of this video. They add new inventory to their website each and every week, so please, folks, after this recap, go check them out. Alright folks, before we get started on today's recap, I would like to point out a couple of funny auctions that came by. I used to have a series on this channel, I haven't done a video of it in quite a while, where we pointed out ridiculous eBay listings, so here's a couple for you that might make your day. Here we have a PSA 9 first edition base set Charizard, the Big Kahuna, that sold for $15,100. And if you're new to this channel or new to Pokemon in general, and you can't tell right now, this is very obviously a fake card, but the subtitle there had me chuckle. And then I stumbled across this little number right here. It is a Mega Starmie EX from Phantasmal Flames, apparently, that sold in auction for $13. And I had to do a double take on this one, folks, because I've never before seen a Starmie dancing in fishnet stockings, and I'm guessing neither have you. So there you go, folks, your day is now complete. You're welcome. Alright folks, let's cover a couple of modern card sales on eBay. Here we have the Full Art Lily from Ultra Prism in PSA 10, sold this week for $1,600. Folks, Lily once ruled the Pokemon card world in terms of full art trainers. This card used to sell for like $3,000 at one time, so $1,600, still not a bad price. Up next we have three Gengar EX cards from Phantom Forces, all in PSA 10, sold for $1,213 this week. From Ancient Origins, we have this Entei Cosmos Holo in PSA 10, sold for $2,225. Here is a Black Star promo Black Kyurem that sold as a PSA 10 for $2,820. I'm betting this is a pretty low pop card. We saw several Pikachu cards come by, modern ones. Here is a McDonald's Holo Pikachu, the 2021 copy, that sold for $205. Another one here sold for $246. Here we have a shiny rare Pikachu from Paldean Fates, doing very well this week, selling for $365. And then here we saw the Metal Pikachu from Celebrations, selling as a PSA 10 for $5,900. On to some graded cards from Phantasmal Flames. The set that was released yesterday already has PSA 10 copies that came by. Here we have the Mega Lopunny EX SIR that sold as a PSA 10 for only $217. However, we got the Mega Charizard EX Special Illustration Rare. We saw two copies of this card come by. One that sold for $5,426. The other one sold for $4,250. Here we have a raw copy of the Gold Mega Charizard EX that sold for $960. And then we are seeing a PSA 10 copy of this card come by tonight in auction. So I will cover it in next week's recap, but I'm sure it will hit an astounding price, no doubt about it. On to some vintage cards on eBay. We have this Japanese base set Charizard with an old as dirt PSA 10 label on it, still sold for $8,691. We saw three first edition base set Yellow Cheeks Pikachus come by. Here's one that sold for $2,093. This one here sold for $2,137. And then one that sold for $2,252. And then we saw 3 unlimited base set Blastoise cards come by. Here is one that sold for $3,250. This one here sold for $4,061. Another one that sold for $4,132. Holy base set Blastoise, Batman. On to some notable Jungle sales. Jungle, as you know, last week did very well. It continues to do very well this week. Also, here's a first edition PSA 10 Jungle Pikachu, sold for $627. Here is a no symbol holo Kangaskhan, sold as a PSA 10 for $3,100 this week. Here's a first edition PSA 10 Jolteon that sold for $14,900. And then on to some fossil cards. Here's the first edition Fossil Zapdos Holo that sold for $2,300, while the Moltres here sold for $2,668. And then we saw the CGC10 Pristine first edition Gengar from Fossil sold for $10,000. And then lastly, the most expensive card from Fossil, the first edition Dragonite Holo, sold for $15,460. We saw 2 first edition Holo Dark Charizards from Team Rocket come by, one that sold for $7,979. The other one sold for $8,100 this week. And then we saw this first edition Dark Blastoise come by that sold for $6,625. From Neo Genesis, we saw this first edition Typhlosion in PSA 10. This is the Typhlosion 18, sold for $2,700, while the unlimited copy sold for $667. I feel that the unlimited WotC Holos in PSA 10 are always underappreciated, and they always will be. A couple of banger Mewtwo cards came by. Here's the first edition Rockets Mewtwo from Gym Challenge that sold for $3,550. Here's a first edition Shining Mewtwo in PSA 10, sold for $10,077, while the Japanese version of this card sold for $21,300. Here's an unlimited Shining Tyranitar in PSA 10, sold for $4,494. Here's the reverse holo Gengar from Skyridge that sold for $7,800 this week. And then on to some old school EX cards. Here's a Venusaur EX from Fire Red Leaf Green, sold for $2,700 this week. Here's the Tyranitar EX from Unseen Forces, sold for $5,703. Here is the Mewtwo EX from Ruby and Sapphire that sold for $5,778. Along with this Mew EX from Holon Phantoms that sold for $7,300. And then lastly, we saw the Lugia EX, which sold for a whopping $14,800. And then on to some Gold Star sales. We have this Gold Star Suicune that came by in PSA 10, sold for $6,100. Here is the Japanese Gold Star Jolteon 20,000 point promo card that sold for $7,821. And then we saw the Gold Star Mewtwo sells at PSA 10 for $22,100. From Platinum Arceus, we saw this Charizard Holo come by, hitting a new record price, I believe, of $4,406. We saw this Cracked Ice Holo Feraligatr from Heart Gold Soul Silver, sold for $1,575, along with this Ho-Oh from Call of Legends that sold for $7,600. And then on to the Fanatics Collect weekly auction block, we have this PSA 9 first edition Lugia from Neo Genesis, sold for $5,520, while another PSA 9 copy of this card, but with the NBA Gold Diamond stamp on it, sold for $7,200. Here's a first edition Ho-Oh from Neo Revelation, sold for $6,900. Here's a CGC10 Pristine Gold Star Regirock, sold for $7,500. Here we have a full art Darkrai Black Star promo from the Black and White era that sold for $8,700. Here from Legendary Collection was the Reverse Holo Mewtwo that sold for $12,600 as a PSA 10. Here we have a 2015 Japanese XY Black Star promo Battle Festa 3rd place trophy card that sold as a PSA 10 for $15,000. This is a Pop 2 PSA 10 card. Here's another banger from Jungle. It's the first edition Scyther, sold for $18,600 as a PSA 10. Here we have a CGC 10 Pristine first edition base set Gyarados, another Pop 2 card that sold for $21,600 this week. Here we have a PSA 9 Gold Star Rayquaza that sold for $28,800. And then here's a 2005 Summer Battle Road Mew Victory Orb card that sold for $30K this week. And then lastly on Fanatics, we saw the insane sale of the Crystal Charizard in PSA 10, where it sold for $38,400. And then to finish off this recap, we saw 3 notable sales, I thought, on alt auctions. Here is the CGC 10 Disco Hollow Mewtwo test print card that sold for $6,959. Here is a CGC 10 Pristine Rockets Snorlax EX, sold for $9,966. And then we saw this PSA 10 Topps Chrome Techno Mewtwo that sold for $21,000. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks. I appreciate you more than you know. Leave a comment below. That's all I got for you today. I will catch you all in my next one.